It all started on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon. The kind of day where the sun is neither too bright nor too dim, and the office air is thick with the hum of fluorescent lights and the shuffle of papers. But despite the normality of the day, I could feel something weighing on me. It was Rob's voice, the one that seemed to cut through every conversation, every moment of quiet. His was the voice that always seemed to be at the forefront of every office gathering, always a step ahead, always making sure the jokes were at my expense. 6 months. That's how long I had been unemployed. 6 months of rejection emails, unanswered calls, and painful conversations with friends and family. 6 months of feeling the world shift around me while I stood frozen in place, watching life pass by. And through it all, Rob had been there. Not physically, perhaps, but his presence loomed large in my life, always lurking, always mocking. I had always admired Rob from a distance. He was confident, charismatic, and always seemed to have it together. He was the kind of person who would walk into a room and instantly command attention, the life of every party, the center of every conversation. It wasn't that he was better than anyone else, it was just that his confidence, his ease, seemed effortless. And for a long time, I envied him. But now, as I sat at my desk, staring at the same job listings I'd been applying to for weeks, his voice echoed across the room. I knew what was coming. He was with his group of friends again, the same group who seemed to find humor in other people's misfortunes, the same group who never failed to laugh at my expense. I could hear Rob's laugh, a loud, boisterous sound that filled the room, and I knew what was coming next. Still haven't found a job, huh? Rob's voice rang out like a bell, sharp and clear. What do you do all day? Just sit at home, wallowing in your misery. Must be nice not to have to work for a living. The laughter that followed was immediate, the kind of laughter that made me shrink in my seat. It wasn't just Rob this time, his friends joined in too. They laughed like it was some kind of inside joke, something that had been going on for months. The same jokes, the same mockery, the same sense of superiority. They didn't know how much it hurt, how deeply their words cut. But somehow, it didn't matter. It wasn't about them understanding. It was about me, about the way I had allowed their words to define me, to shape the way I saw myself. I felt a flush of heat rise to my face. My palms were clammy, and my heart began to race. But I kept my head down, pretending not to notice, pretending it didn't bother me. I had learned long ago that the best way to deal with people like Rob was to ignore them, to let their words bounce off me like water off a duck's back. But deep down, I was seething. I was angry, hurt, and frustrated, not just at Rob, but at myself for letting it go on for so long. You know, it's funny, Rob continued, his voice louder now, every time I see you, you're always on the computer. What, you still looking for a job? Maybe you should just give up. It's not like you're going to find anything anyway. You've had plenty of time. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. The room seemed to narrow, the walls closing in around me as the voices of Rob and his friends became louder, more piercing. I tried to focus on my screen, on the job applications that I had been sending out, but it felt like everything around me was spinning out of control. I could hear their laughter again, but this time it sounded different. It wasn't just mocking anymore. It was cruel. It was like they enjoyed seeing me squirm, enjoyed making me feel small, insignificant. I could feel my chest tighten, my breath becoming shallow as the weight of their words pressed down on me. But then something changed. A flicker of something, anger, maybe, or just sheer exhaustion, started to bubble up inside of me. I wasn't going to take it anymore. I wasn't going to let Rob and his friends define who I was. I wasn't going to let them make me feel like I was less than human just because I didn't have a job. I had fought too hard to get to where I was, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. I stood up suddenly, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. The noise caught the attention of everyone in the room, and for a moment, there was silence. Rob's mocking grin faltered as he turned to face me, his eyes narrowing in confusion. "What's wrong, are you going to cry now?" he sneered, his friend snickering behind him. For a split second, I considered walking away. I considered going back to my desk, pretending like nothing had happened, like I hadn't just been humiliated in front of everyone. But I couldn't. I couldn't let it slide anymore. "No," I said, my voice steady, but with an edge to it that I hadn't heard before. "You're the one who's going to leave." The word seemed to hang in the air for a moment, and Rob's expression changed. He blinked, as though he hadn't expected me to say anything at all. His friends stopped laughing, sensing the shift in the room. They all looked between Rob and me, unsure of what was going to happen next. I continued, stepping forward, "It's time for you to go." The tension in the room was palpable. Rob's face turned from confusion to disbelief, and then to anger. He opened his mouth to speak, but I raised a hand to stop him. "You've had your fun, Rob. You've had your laugh at my expense, and now it's over." His friends were silent now, all eyes fixed on us as the atmosphere thickened with an intensity one hadn't expected. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my hands were shaking, but I couldn't back down. "Not now. Not after everything. You think it's funny to mock people who are struggling?" I asked, my voice rising. "You think it's funny to belittle someone who's trying their best? Well, I'm done with it. You and your friends," I gestured toward the group, "you're all going to leave." For a long moment, no one spoke. The room was frozen in time, each person unsure of what would happen next. Rob's face was red with anger, but he didn't move. Neither did his friends. They all just stood there, staring at me. Finally, Rob scoffed. "You can't be serious," he muttered under his breath. "You can't fire me. This isn't your office." But I was already moving. "I don't have to be the boss to make you leave, Rob. You're fired. All of you." The words hung in the air like a heavy fog, thick with finality. And for the first time in months, I felt a surge of power. I felt alive. This wasn't just about Rob or his friends, it was about me reclaiming control over my life. It was about not letting anyone else dictate my worth. As I turned back to my desk, I could hear Rob and his friends murmuring behind me, but I didn't care. I had done what I thought I could never do, stand up for myself. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a future. A future that didn't involve their mocking laughter, their judgment. A future where I was in control. The following days after my confrontation with Rob were strange, to say the least. The office that had once felt like a comfortable space to work in now felt suffocating. I had never imagined that standing up for myself would come with so many unforeseen consequences. But here I was, still trying to navigate a world where everyone saw me as someone who had crossed a line. As I entered the office the morning after my bold declaration, a heavy silence greeted me. No one spoke to me immediately, not even to offer their usual morning greetings. It was as though the room was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Rob was absent. He hadn't come in that day, nor had his friends. I didn't know whether to feel relieved or anxious. I had expected some kind of backlash, but nothing had prepared me for this. Nothing had prepared me for the cold shoulder from my colleagues, who were once friendly acquaintances, now treating me like I had just made the worst mistake of my life. I sat at my desk, trying to keep my head down, trying to focus on the work in front of me. But it was hard. The weight of my actions lingered over me. In a way, I had thrown away years of professional relationships just to silence one person's cruelty. Was it worth it? Was this newfound peace worth the alienation I was now feeling? The first hour of my day passed in almost complete silence. No one came over to chat. No one stopped by to ask about the project we were working on. It was as if I had become a pariah, someone to be avoided at all costs. The few times I made eye contact with my coworkers, they quickly looked away, pretending not to see me. The tension in the air was palpable, but no one spoke of what had happened. It was all left unspoken, buried under layers of uncomfortable glances and hushed whispers. At lunch, I found myself eating alone, sitting in the corner of the office break room. The usual group that had once gathered to share stories of their weekends, work frustrations, or office gossip was now scattered, each person isolated in their own corner. I could see Rob's friends in the far corner, whispering among themselves. When one of them glanced my way, I saw the faintest hint of disdain in their eyes. The very people who had once laughed at my expense were now silently judging me. It was as though my defiance had been more than just a break from my usual meekness, it was a betrayal to the group's unspoken code. Just as I was about to finish my meal, the door to the break room opened, and in walked my boss, Karen. She didn't look at me at first. She was scanning the room, her eyes pausing for a moment on the cluster of people still gathered around Rob's old friends. The air grew colder as Karen made her way toward me. "Can I have a word with you?" she asked, her tone measured but unmistakably firm. I didn't have a choice. I stood up and followed her to her office, my stomach churning with the anticipation of what was coming next. As we entered her office, Karen gestured for me to sit. She closed the door behind her, casting a shadow over the room. The walls felt like they were closing in, and the uncomfortable tension from the break room seemed to have followed me. "Let me start by saying this," Karen said, crossing her arms over her chest. "You've made a very bold move in the office. And while I understand that your actions were born out of frustration, I need to remind you that there are better ways to handle conflict." I swallowed hard. I had expected this conversation, but now that it was happening, I wasn't sure how to respond. I wanted to defend myself, to explain how Rob's constant taunts had chipped away at my self-esteem, how I had finally reached my breaking point. But Karen wasn't here to hear my side. She wasn't here to empathize with my situation. She was here to remind me of the consequences of defying the status quo. "Rob," she continued, "he's been with this company for over 10 years. He has a lot of influence here. You must have known that your actions would have a ripple effect, not just on him but on the rest of the team." I nodded slowly, my hands gripping the edge of the chair. I didn't want things to escalate like this. I just couldn't take it anymore. He kept mocking me, and I snapped. But I didn't mean to disrupt the entire office. Karen sighed, rubbing the back of her neck as she stared at the floor for a moment. "Look, I get it. I really do. But this isn't high school. You can't just go around firing people, even if they've wronged you. That's not how we do things here. It creates division, and that's exactly what's happening now. People are talking. They're upset, and they're worried about what will happen next." Her words stung. I had hoped that Karen would understand, that she would see the frustration that had built up in me over the months. But instead, I felt like she was holding me accountable for something I hadn't fully understood myself until now. I had made a choice in the heat of the moment, but now that the heat had cooled, the consequences were becoming clearer, and they weren't pretty. "I don't know what you want me to do," I said quietly. "I can't take it back now. What's done is done." Karen's expression softened slightly, but there was no mistaking the seriousness in her eyes. "What you can do now is make amends. You need to go to Rob and apologize. It won't fix everything, but it will show that you're willing to take responsibility for your actions." I felt my stomach churn again. Apologize? After everything he had put me through? After all the mocking and the laughter at my expense? The idea of apologizing seemed almost absurd, but I knew that Karen was right. This wasn't about my feelings, it was about the company, the team, and my place within it. If I wanted to stay, I had to make things right. "Fine," I muttered, feeling the weight of the decision settle over me. "I'll do it." Karen nodded and opened the door, signaling the end of the conversation. "Good. And just so we're clear, this doesn't mean everything's forgiven. You'll have to work hard to rebuild the trust that was lost. But this is a start. As I walked back to my desk, I felt a sinking feeling in my chest. The office, once a place of routine, had turned into a battlefield. Rob was still gone, but I could feel the lingering effects of my actions in every corner of the office. I wasn't just the person who had fired Rob and his friends, I was the one who had disrupted the peace. And no matter how hard I tried, I knew that things would never be the same again. The rest of the day. The day dragged on, filled with tension and uneasy glances. I found it impossible to concentrate. The apologies I had been told to offer weighed heavily on my mind, and I wasn't sure how Rob would react. Would he accept it? Or would he lash out at me, making things even worse? By the time the end of the day came, I had worked myself into a frenzy. I had tried to push the thoughts aside, but they kept returning, gnawing at me like a persistent itch I couldn't scratch. I packed up my things slowly, knowing that I couldn't avoid the inevitable. As I headed to the elevator, I saw Rob standing by the exit, talking to one of the other senior staff members. His face was unreadable, and for a moment, I debated turning back. But I couldn't. This was the moment I had to face. I walked up to him, feeling the weight of the past few days pressing down on me. He glanced at me but didn't speak right away. For a second, I wondered if he would just ignore me, if he would pretend like nothing had happened. "Rob," I said quietly, my voice steady but betraying a hint of nervousness. "I need to talk to you." He turned fully toward me, his eyes narrowing slightly. "About what?" "I'm sorry for what happened," I said, forcing the words out. "I shouldn't have confronted you the way I did. I lost my temper, and I understand that it upset things in the office." Rob didn't say anything for a long time. He just stood there, staring at me with an unreadable expression. The silence stretched on, each second feeling like an eternity. Finally, he spoke. "You really think an apology is going to fix this? After everything I've heard about you?" His voice was cold, but there was something else there, something I couldn't quite place. "I don't know if I can forgive you." I felt a lump form in my throat, but I held my ground. "I understand," I said. "I just wanted to take responsibility for what I did." He nodded slowly. "We'll see how this plays out. But don't expect things to go back to normal." I left that night, not knowing what the future held. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had done the right thing. The path ahead was uncertain, but at least I had taken a step toward healing. The days following my conversation with Rob and the apology I had given him felt like I was walking on eggshells. The office that once felt like a place of routine and comfort now seemed like a battlefield, and every move I made was carefully considered, every word I spoke weighed against the backdrop of what had happened. The tension in the air was almost palpable, thick enough to cut through with a knife. Rob had accepted my apology, or so it seemed, but I could tell that something had shifted. His cold demeanor, the way he now avoided eye contact, told me that our relationship had been irrevocably altered. Karen had warned me that rebuilding trust would take time, but I hadn't expected it to feel so suffocating. The office, once a space I was comfortable in, now felt like a pressure cooker. The polite distance everyone had created between me and them was unnerving. I didn't know whether it was because of Rob or because my actions had disrupted the unspoken order that had once existed, but there was no denying that things had changed. As I sat at my desk, trying to focus on my work, I couldn't shake the feeling that everyone was watching me. Whenever I entered a room, conversation seemed to abruptly stop, as though they were waiting for me to speak. It was as though I had become an outsider in my own office, a pariah who no one knew how to handle. Even the light banter that had once filled the air was gone. No one made jokes anymore. No one engaged in small talk. The hum of the office had been replaced by an awkward silence that hung heavily in the air. I couldn't help but wonder if I had made a mistake. Maybe Karen had been right. Maybe I should have kept quiet, endured Rob's taunts, and let the years of passive torment pass. But Rob's taunts, and let the years of passive torment pass. But something inside of me had snapped. I couldn't go back to the way I had been before, the quiet, meek person who let others walk all over them. The cost of standing up for myself had been high, but I wasn't sure I could regret it entirely. At least now, I was no longer invisible. I wasn't the person who just took whatever was handed to them. I had taken a stand, and while it had cost me something, it had also made me feel alive in a way that I hadn't felt in months. Still, the cost weighed on me. Rob wasn't the only one whose behavior had changed. My co-workers, those I had thought of as friends, had pulled back. I had no idea where to start mending these fractured relationships. They weren't outright hostile, but their reluctance to engage with me spoke volumes. I could tell that the entire office was uncomfortable, and I had no idea how to make things right. It was like I was a puzzle piece that no longer fit into the puzzle. I had hoped that time would heal the wounds, but the truth was, things only seemed to get worse. The days felt longer, and the work seemed more difficult. No matter how much I tried to focus, I could never shake the feeling that something was missing. I no longer felt like I was part of a team. I was isolated in a sea of faces, all of whom had their own personal conversations and groups, while I sat quietly at my desk, trying to get through each day. The isolation gnawed at me. A new challenge arises. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, they did. The next big event came in the form of an email, one that hit my inbox around mid-afternoon. It was from the HR department, and the subject line read, "Meeting request." My heart sank as I clicked on the email and read the brief message. "We would like to schedule a meeting with you regarding a matter of importance. Please come by the HR office at 4 p.m. today." A wave of anxiety washed over me. I had no idea what this could be about. Was it about Rob? Was Karen speaking to HR about what had happened? Had I crossed a line in my apology? What if they were planning to let me go? I couldn't concentrate for the rest of the day. The minutes dragged on, each one feeling like an eternity. My mind raced with thoughts of what the meeting could be about. I had no clear answers, only a growing sense of dread. At 4 p.m., I stood up from my desk, my legs shaky beneath me. I could feel the eyes of my colleagues on me as I walked out of the office and made my way to the HR department. The walk felt long and drawn out, each step echoing in my mind. By the time I reached the HR office, my palms were clammy, and I had to take a deep breath before I knocked on the door. "Come in," a voice called from the inside. I opened the door slowly, and there was Karen, sitting behind her desk, flanked by the head of HR, a woman I hadn't spoken to much, and another senior manager, John. Their expressions were serious, their body language tense. The second I entered the room, I knew something was wrong. "Please, have a seat," Karen said, motioning toward the chair across from her. I sat down, my heart racing. Karen cleared her throat and spoke first. "We've been reviewing the incident with Rob and the subsequent events that followed. After careful consideration, we've come to a conclusion," Karen began. I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. The silence in the room felt like it was suffocating me. What were they about to say? "We want to be clear that we value your contributions to this company, but the situation with Rob has created an uncomfortable atmosphere. Many people feel that your actions were disruptive, and while we understand your frustration, it has affected team morale." I nodded slowly, unsure of what to say. I wasn't sure if they were going to reprimand me, or if they were hinting at something worse. Karen's words hung heavy in the air, and I struggled to find a response. "We've decided that it would be best for you to take some time off," John, the senior manager, spoke up. "This will give the team some space to process everything. We'll give you 2 weeks paid leave to allow you to regroup and reflect on the situation." I blinked, shocked. Time off? That was the solution? It felt like a punishment, but I wasn't sure if I had the right to argue. "Karen, what does this mean? Will I be?" I started to ask, but she raised a hand to stop me. This isn't a disciplinary action. It's an opportunity for you to step back and gain perspective. We need to restore the atmosphere in the office, and we believe some time away will help. I sat back in my chair, processing what they were saying. Time off. They weren't firing me. But it was clear that they weren't thrilled with the way I had handled the situation either. 2 weeks. I would be away from the office for 2 weeks. Reflecting on the break. The following days were a blur. I packed my things and left the office that afternoon, the tension from the meeting still hanging over me like a dark cloud. I tried to make sense of it all, but it was hard to focus on anything. The first few days of my leave felt strange. The silence in my apartment felt heavier than usual, the absence of the office grind giving me too much time to think. I spent the next few days trying to clear my head, but it wasn't easy. The weight of the situation bore down on me, and I found myself replaying the events over and over in my mind. What had I done wrong? Was standing up for myself really the mistake they seemed to think it was? Or was this just the price I had to pay for choosing to fight back against an injustice? A sudden discovery. It wasn't until the end of the first week of my leave that I stumbled across something that completely changed the way I viewed everything. I had been going through some old emails when I noticed a message from Rob. It had been sent the morning after our confrontation. I hadn't seen it before, as it had gone straight to my spam folder. But something about it caught my attention, and I opened it. The email read, "I know what you did. But don't think for a second that you've won. You have no idea who you're dealing with. You've just made a very powerful enemy. I suggest you watch your back." The word sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't just about a workplace disagreement. This was something much darker. And I had no idea what I had truly gotten myself into. The days after reading Rob's email felt like an unnerving spiral. The coldness that had already settled around me at work now seemed like a prelude to something darker. I had tried to brush it off, convince myself that Rob's words were just the rantings of a wounded ego. But deep down, a small, persistent part of me told me that this was no ordinary office drama. This was something bigger, something I couldn't ignore. I spent the rest of the week at home, trying to clear my mind, but every time I closed my eyes, the words of Rob's email echoed in my head. "I know what you did. But don't think for a second that you've won." I kept replaying them over and over, as though if I said them aloud enough, I could make sense of them. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the issue wasn't just between me and Rob. It was much larger than that. It had to be. The words, "powerful enemy," had stayed with me, like a shadow that wouldn't let go. Rob had mentioned that I had no idea who I was dealing with. It was a warning, but it wasn't just a casual threat. It was deliberate. It was as if he knew something about me, something I wasn't aware of. I spent hours combing through the company's intranet, searching for anything that could give me a hint as to what Rob might be involved with. The usual office gossip and reports came up, but nothing that stood out. It wasn't until I stumbled upon an old internal memo that I found something strange. There, buried in an old post from the HR department, was a list of high-profile clients the company had worked with. Among them was a name that struck me, Zellcorp Industries. It was the name of a company I had never heard of before. But something about it felt important. Zellcorp wasn't just another client. They were involved in high-stakes ventures that I could only assume were risky, or even dangerous. I didn't know why it caught my eye, but it sent a jolt of anxiety through my chest. I quickly searched the company's website, looking for any clues. Zellcorp was a private company, and information about them was scarce. But one thing was clear: they were involved in finance, technology, and various high-end business dealings that crossed international borders. I didn't have the full picture, but this could be the key to understanding Rob's cryptic email. Zellcorp had enough money and influence to make a significant impact, and now they were linked to the company I worked for. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit, but there were still so many unanswered questions. The ties that bind. The next morning, after another restless night, I woke up determined to get to the bottom of it all. I couldn't just sit around and wait. Rob's threat loomed over me like a storm cloud, and I needed to know what was coming. I couldn't let him control my life any longer. I decided to go back to the office. My 2-week leave had come to an end, and even though I knew things would still be awkward, I needed to return. The fear of the unknown was gnawing at me. What if Rob really did have some kind of power over the situation? What if he was part of something much larger than I had ever realized? When I entered the office building, I was met with the same cold silence. It was like walking into a different world. The hum of fluorescent lights seemed louder, the space more sterile. The usual chatter of coworkers had been replaced by hushed conversations and sideways glances. The room felt like a place that had been suffocated by tension. Rob wasn't in yet, and I didn't expect him to be. But his absence didn't bring any relief. If anything, it made everything feel even more surreal. I sat at my desk, trying to focus on the task at hand, but it was impossible. The weight of Rob's cryptic warning hung in the air, pressing down on me like an invisible force. My thoughts kept drifting back to Zellcorp. What was their connection to Rob? Why had he specifically mentioned that I had no idea who I was dealing with? There had to be something more to this. I needed to find out more about Zellcorp and its involvement with the company. But where could I start? A new lead. That afternoon, after I had barely made a dent in my workload, I received a call. The number was unfamiliar, and for a moment, I hesitated to answer. But something in me told me I had to. "Hello?" I said cautiously. "Is this your name?" The voice on the other end was smooth, calm, and vaguely familiar. It was a voice I hadn't heard before, but there was something unsettling about it. It sounded like it had been rehearsed. "Yes, this is your name. Who's calling?" "Let's just say I know you've been digging into things you shouldn't," the voice continued. "I think it's time you know the full picture." A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't Rob, this was someone else. Someone who knew about my search. Someone who clearly knew more than they were letting on. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice growing shaky with a mix of curiosity and fear. "Someone who's been watching your every move," the voice replied. "I know you've been looking into Zellcorp. That's your first mistake. But don't worry. I'm not here to hurt you. Not yet, anyway. You just need to stop digging. Before things get worse." The line went dead before I could respond. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at my phone. My mind was reeling. This wasn't just some office drama. I was in the middle of something far deeper, and I had no idea how far it went. Who was this person? How did they know about Zellcorp, and how did they know about me? I quickly made the decision to go to the library. I needed to gather more information. The voice on the phone had warned me to stop looking, but that only fueled my determination. There had to be something I was missing. Something that could help me piece it all together. Uncovering the truth. At the library, I pulled up all available information on Zellcorp and its business dealings. I spent hours combing through financial records, company filings, and articles from news outlets. The deeper I dug, the more unsettling the connections became. Zellcorp wasn't just another company, it was part of a much larger network of global businesses, some of which had been involved in controversial and illegal dealings. Zellcorp's financial ties led to major players in both legitimate and shadowy industries. There were reports of money laundering schemes, high-profile investors linked to criminal organizations, and allegations of corporate espionage. What was even more troubling was that some of the connections seemed to trace back to key figures at my own company. It was clear that the company I worked for had been involved in something far larger than I had realized. Rob's role in all of this was becoming clearer by the minute. He wasn't just a colleague. He was a player in a larger, more dangerous game. But even with all this information, I couldn't connect the dots. Zellcorp's operations were so widespread, so complex, that it was impossible to see how it all tied together. That's when I stumbled across a name that stood out: Catherine Harrow. Catherine Harrow was listed as an executive at Zellcorp. Her name kept coming up in various high-profile documents, and what stood out to me was her connection to Rob. They had worked together on several projects, both within the company and with external clients. But it wasn't just their professional connections that intrigued me, it was the whispers of their personal relationship that seemed to lurk just beneath the surface. I had no idea what this meant yet, but something told me that Catherine Harrow was a pivotal piece of the puzzle. She was the key to understanding Rob's cryptic threats, and she was the person I needed to speak to if I was going to get the answers I so desperately needed. The library had become my refuge in the days following my unsettling discoveries. The quiet corners, the flickering overhead lights, and the rows of books seemed to absorb my thoughts, offering me a sense of calm as I dove deeper into the rabbit hole. The more I uncovered, the more questions I had. There were times when I felt like I was racing against time, and other times when I felt completely paralyzed by the magnitude of the secrets I had uncovered. But I couldn't stop. I had to know the truth, no matter the cost. The name Catherine Harrow kept popping up in the files I had been poring over. She wasn't just an executive at Zellcorp, she was the key. But I didn't know how. I didn't know why. And I certainly didn't know how Rob fit into all of this. What was his role in this web of corporate deceit, shadowy financial deals, and possibly even criminal activity? I couldn't stop thinking about the phone call, the voice that had warned me to stop digging. It was clear that I was getting closer to something important. But that also meant I was getting closer to danger. The tension in my chest only tightened as I sifted through the reports. Every page I turned felt like I was walking a little further into a trap, but the compulsion to keep going was stronger than ever. The discovery of Catherine Harrow. One evening, I sat hunched over a dusty desk at the library, the soft hum of the air conditioning filling the otherwise silent room. It had been a long day of cross-referencing documents, and I was beginning to feel like I was running in circles. That was until I stumbled across something truly disturbing. It was a leaked internal memo from Zellcorp, dated several years ago, detailing a series of transactions that had occurred between the company and several other firms involved in illegal arms deals and money laundering. The memo wasn't just a casual document, it was the smoking gun I had been looking for. And right there, at the bottom of the memo, was Catherine Harrow's name, along with Rob's. They had both signed off on the transactions. A wave of nausea hit me. I had expected corruption, I had expected shady dealings, but this was far beyond anything I had imagined. Catherine Harrow and Rob weren't just participants, they were actively orchestrating these deals. And that meant everything I had uncovered so far was only the tip of the iceberg. Zellcorp, my company, Rob, and Catherine, everyone was tied to something far bigger than I could have imagined. I needed more answers. I needed to speak with Catherine Harrow. But how? She was a powerful figure at Zellcorp, and I had no idea how to get in contact with her. I couldn't just show up at her office and demand answers. I wasn't even sure where she was based. The more I thought about it, the more impossible the task seemed. But I couldn't let this go. If there was one thing I had learned, it was that silence only led to more lies, and the longer I stayed quiet, the more dangerous the situation became. The message. Late that night, after hours of pacing back and forth in my small apartment, I sat down at my desk, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I had to contact her. I had to make her aware that I knew what was happening. But how would I approach her? What would I say? How could I make sure I wasn't walking straight into a trap? I decided to send a carefully crafted email, one that would catch her attention without raising suspicion. It was simple, direct, but it carried enough weight to let her know that I was serious. Subject: a mutual interest. Catherine Harrow. I know about your dealings at Zellcorp. I have uncovered things that you may not want brought to light. I suggest we meet to discuss the matter, before this gets out of hand. I expect a response. Regards. Your name. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen. My heart raced. I knew it was risky. If she didn't respond, I could be in more danger than I was already in. But if she did, if she took the bait, it could lead to the answers I so desperately needed. I clicked send and immediately regretted it. My pulse quickened as I stared at the blinking cursor on the screen. What had I done? What if this email led to my own downfall? But then, the reply came. It was brief, almost too brief. Subject, a mutual interest. We can meet. But not here. I'll send you details. Expect an invitation soon. Catherine Harrow. The meeting. I didn't sleep that night. The invitation hadn't come through right away, but when it did, I could barely contain my excitement. It was a carefully encrypted message, with instructions that took me to a nondescript coffee shop in the middle of the city. The note read simply. Come alone. Do not bring anyone. We'll talk at 10 p.m. Do not be late. I knew this was my only chance. I had no idea what I was walking into, but there was no turning back now. As the hour approached, I felt a mixture of dread and exhilaration. Every part of my body screamed for me to turn around, to walk away, but I couldn't. Not when I was this close. The coffee shop was nearly empty when I arrived, the low hum of jazz music in the background. It had a cozy, unassuming vibe, but I could tell it wasn't just any coffee shop. I scanned the room for any signs of Catherine. At first, I saw nothing out of the ordinary. But then, in the corner booth by the window, I spotted a woman in a black jacket, her face partially obscured by the shadows. It was her. Catherine Harrow. I walked over, my heart pounding in my chest. She didn't look up when I approached, but I knew it was her. Ms. Harrow? I said, trying to sound confident, though my voice betrayed my nerves. She looked up, her icy blue eyes meeting mine. Her expression was unreadable, but I could tell she had been expecting me. She gestured for me to sit. Let's get one thing straight, she said, her voice calm and controlled, you have no idea what you've gotten yourself into. But now that you're here, there's no turning back. Understand? I nodded, swallowing hard. You think you've uncovered something big, something you can use to threaten me. But you're wrong. I've been in this game a lot longer than you think, she continued, her eyes narrowing. This isn't just about money, and it's certainly not about power. It's about something much, much bigger. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Rob, Zellcorp, everything, it's all part of a much larger operation. I felt my heart rate spike. What operation? What is this really about? Catherine leaned forward, her eyes never leaving mine. You've heard of the global financial crisis, right? What they don't tell you is that it wasn't just an accident. It was orchestrated. And you've been digging into the very people who were behind it. My mind was spinning. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. You're talking about conspiracy theories, I said, my voice shaky, this is just corporate corruption. This isn't some kind of international plot. Think again, Catherine replied coldly. This isn't just corruption. It's manipulation of entire economies. We've been pulling the strings of governments, corporations, and people just like you for years. The financial crisis? That was just the beginning. The game is much larger than you could ever imagine. I felt a cold sweat breaking out on my brow. My entire world was crumbling, my understanding of everything I thought I knew was being shattered. What do you want from me? I asked, barely able to form the words. I want you to stop, Catherine said, her voice suddenly softer. I want you to walk away from this, forget you ever found out. Because if you don't, if you keep pushing this, you will become a target. We can make your life miserable in ways you can't even imagine. I sat back, stunned by the implications of her words. My entire life had been a lie. Everything I had learned, everything I thought I knew, was a carefully constructed facade. Why are you telling me this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Because you need to understand what you're up against. And if you're smart, you'll drop this now. Walk away. Live your life. Otherwise, you'll end up like all the others who came before you. Disappeared, erased from history. Her words hung in the air like a death sentence. I knew in that moment that my life would never be the same again. I was part of something now, something I couldn't escape from. The words Catherine Harrow had spoken to me still echoed in my head long after I left the coffee shop. You will become a target, she had said. Disappear, erased from history. The thought haunted me, gnawing at the edges of my mind. I had entered the world of corporate corruption with no understanding of the true magnitude of the situation, but now, the truth was undeniable. What I had uncovered wasn't just a few bad deals or unethical practices, it was a global conspiracy, a web of lies that stretched far beyond what I could have imagined. But as I walked back to my apartment, my mind racing with everything I had just learned, something inside me refused to accept the idea of walking away. Catherine's warning hung over me like a dark cloud, but it wasn't enough to make me turn back. I couldn't erase the truth from my mind. And no matter how dangerous it became, I knew I couldn't just let it go. Not now. I returned to my apartment and sat at my desk, trying to make sense of everything. The revelation that this was all part of a larger operation, orchestrated by powerful people like Catherine and Rob, seemed almost impossible to process. But there was no denying what I had seen, what I had uncovered. The documents, the reports, the whispered conversations, everything pointed to something far more sinister than I had originally thought. This wasn't just about money or power, it was about control on a global scale. And I was now a part of it. The clock ticked steadily on the wall as I sat, lost in thought. I had no idea what my next step should be. Part of me wanted to disappear, to heed Catherine's warning and leave everything behind. But another part of me, something deep inside, refused to let go of the truth. I had spent too long digging, too long unraveling the threads, to walk away now. The next few days were a blur of sleepless nights and constant anxiety. I knew that whatever decision I made, it would come with a cost. The more I thought about the people who were involved, Catherine, Rob, Zelcorp, the mysterious global network behind it all, the more I realized that I was in way over my head. But what did I have left? A life built on lies? A career that would always be tainted by the shadows of those in power? I couldn't let them win. I needed answers. I needed to know how deep this conspiracy really went. And the only way to do that was to confront the people behind it. The encounter. It wasn't long before I got my next opportunity. My phone buzzed late one evening, the message displayed on the screen catching my attention. It was from an unknown number. We know you've been looking for answers. We can help you. Meet us tomorrow at 9 p.m. at the usual spot. My heart skipped a beat. I knew exactly what this was. The usual spot referred to a quiet alley behind a cafe a few blocks from my apartment, where I had met Rob's associates before. It was a dangerous place, one I'd never thought I'd have to return to, but I knew this was the only way forward. The message was clear: if I wanted the truth, I had to take the risk. The next evening, I dressed in dark clothes, my nerves on edge. I wasn't sure what I was walking into, but I knew that it could be the turning point of everything. When I arrived at the alley, the streetlights barely illuminated the path ahead. It was a place that felt like a void, empty yet full of unseen dangers. As I stepped into the alley, I heard footsteps approaching. A figure emerged from the shadows. It was Rob. His face was unreadable, but there was a hint of something in his eyes, something that made me uneasy. "You've been digging into things you don't understand," Rob said, his voice low but steady. "Catherine warned you, didn't she? She told you to stop, and yet here you are. You think you can just waltz in and expose the system? You don't have the power to take us down." His words stung, but I stood my ground. "I know what you're involved in, Rob. I know about the arms deals, the money laundering, and everything else you've been hiding. And I'm not going to back down. Not now." Rob laughed, a cold, hollow sound that seemed to echo off the alley walls. "You're out of your league. You don't even know who you're dealing with. Catherine isn't just an executive, she's the one who pulls the strings. She's the reason the world works the way it does. And you're just another pawn in a game you'll never understand." I clenched my fists, trying to suppress the rage building inside of me. Why do this? Why destroy everything? Why take control of people's lives? Rob's expression shifted, the mask of indifference slipping for a moment. "It's not about destroying people's lives, it's about control. Power. You wouldn't understand. We've been doing this for years. We've built something that can't be undone. If you're smart, you'll leave. Walk away before things get worse for you." I didn't respond right away. Instead, I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "I'm not walking away. Not anymore." Rob's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, there was a flash of something dangerous in his gaze. But then, he just shook his head, a cold smile tugging at his lips. "Fine. But don't say we didn't warn you." Before I could say anything else, he turned and disappeared into the darkness. I stood there for a few moments, my heart pounding, before I realized that something was off. There was a noise behind me, footsteps approaching quickly. My instincts kicked in, and I turned just in time to see a man lunging at me. I barely had time to react. The man grabbed my arm, twisting it behind my back, and shoved me against the wall. His grip was ironclad, and I could feel the pressure building as he tightened his hold. I struggled, but it was no use. "You should have listened," the man hissed. "You've dug too deep. Now you'll pay the price." I couldn't get a word out before another figure emerged from the shadows. It was Catherine. Her icy blue eyes glinted in the low light, and a smirk played at the corner of her lips. "You're persistent," she said, her voice almost admiring. "I'll give you that. But you're making a huge mistake. This isn't a game you can win." My thoughts raced. There was no way out of this. I was trapped, surrounded by people who had all the power in the world. The weight of the situation pressed down on me, and for the first time, I realized just how dangerous it had become. I wasn't just fighting for answers anymore, I was fighting for my life. But before I could fully process what was happening, Catherine motioned for the man to release me. "We're not here to hurt you," she said, her voice surprisingly calm. "But you need to understand something. The world we've built isn't one you can just walk away from. If you keep pushing, you'll be destroyed. Your career. Your life. Everything you hold dear, it will all vanish." I stood there, gasping for air, trying to regain my bearings. "I'm not afraid of you," I said, my voice shaking but defiant. "I've already lost everything. There's nothing you can take from me." Catherine studied me for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, with a sigh, she said, "You don't get it, do you? This isn't just about you or me. It's about a system that's been in place for centuries. A system that controls everything. You can't expose it. You can't fight it. But if you want to try, go ahead. But just know that you're not the first person to think they can take us down. And you won't be the last." I stood silently, my heart pounding in my chest. I had come so far, uncovered so much, but in that moment, I realized the truth. The system they had built was too powerful, too ingrained in the fabric of the world. And no matter how much I fought, no matter how many truths I uncovered, I was just one person against an empire. Catherine turned and started to walk away, her heels clicking against the pavement. "It's over," she said without looking back. "But if you ever change your mind, you know where to find us." I stood there, frozen, as the shadows swallowed her figure. The man who had held me released a final, cold laugh before he, too, vanished into the darkness.